guys, this is Svetlana from Marm Cosplay and welcome back to another fancy costume making video. After making two large Monster Hunter costumes this year, the Zinogre armor and the Gigante armor, I thought, why stop now? And here we are, back again, making another Monster Hunter costume. Yay! So today I'm going to show you how I create the costume from Sophia, the Guildmarm from Monster Hunter 4. She is my absolute favorite and I totally fell in love with her when she tried to kill me the very first time. But if you look closely at her costume, you might notice something like, see this? She is not wearing any armor, like, at all. This means the whole costume is made out of
fabric.
For me, sewing is a little bit more difficult than making armor, so this costume took a little bit longer than expected. If you also have trouble with sewing, check out my beginner's book for sewing, where I show you everything I learned when I got started. You know, the best way to learn sewing is also from somebody who has no idea about sewing, right? Good. And now, let's start. My main reference was this awesome figurine I found online. She was just perfect to figure out all the details and shapes. This Monster Hunter art book was a big help as well. It included not only different views of the layers of her clothes, but also some super cute alternative outfits. Finally, I found some great crafting inspiration from the cosplayer Sayuri. She already made a lot of Monster Hunter cosplays and really inspired me with her progress photos. So, let's start with the coat. I didn't find a proper sewing pattern here, so I made one myself with some old fabric. This part looked pretty stiff and cozy in the reference, so I've used the warm felt fabric. I traced my raw pattern onto the material, cut it out and clipped all parts together. These things are called wonder clips and they are super handy. Afterwards, I sewed everything together and added some pretty top stitching. This also helped to keep the seams nice and even. The patterns of the sleeves looked super weird, but I had honestly no idea what I was doing. I just tried something out and hoped it would work. After I sewed both parts together, this was the result. I actually had to cut some fabric away here and there, but at the end the sleeve and the coat could be sewn together. Yay, the base looks good! For the yellow triangles along the edges, I drew a pattern first. Making them straight would be far easier, but I wanted to avoid ugly wrinkles. After tracing and sewing everything together, I turned the fabric inside out, ironed it, secured the shape with a further seam, and attached the triangles to the coat. I have so many of these clips, they are awesome. Now I only had to turn the fabric. For that I placed some pins and added a further seam. Same goes for the color of the coat. I added here a second layer and turned the whole part inside out. To flatten the color, an extra seam was necessary. Following this, I added more pins to connect this part with the coat. For the lining, I made a second piece that would hide all the ugly seams. Afterwards, I pinned the fabric on and did quite some hand stitching. This step took a lot of time, but it was totally worth it. Finally, Benny applied some airbrush colors and iron-on flock. These details are barely visible, but I think without them the coat would look too plain. Next, he also used our embroidery machine to create these patches. I made the same with my sewing machine before, but his just looked better. As you can see, Benny applied them super professionally with fabric glue. Well, and this was the final coat. And a sleepy Midna. Next, the vest. I didn't find a fitting pattern, so I drew one onto some tape on my dress form. My material choice was this lovely textured fabric. I just cut and traced all parts onto it. These were all of them. I also prepared the lining, as you can see. Next, I clipped everything together and sewed along the edges. So far, so good. Same went for the lining. I turned both parts inside out and pinned them over each other. After connecting the edges and turning the fabric again, the main part of the lining was sewn on. I used a special foot to place the buttonholes and opened the fabric afterwards carefully. The machine attached the buttons as well. This might not be the proper way to create a vest, but it worked. And Minna was still sleeping. Next, the blouse. At least I found a pattern this time. Following the instructions, I cut all parts out and traced them onto slightly stretchy fabric. I finished the edges with my serger so they don't fray out anymore. Afterwards, I prepared all parts and folded some ruffles. I pretty much guessed everything here. As you can see, I used my serger here as well. Next, I carefully attached the ruffles to the blouse and sewed both parts together. Now I placed more pins and connected everything. The result turned out a little bit too large though, so I had to get rid of some material and add extra folds. This way it became far more fitting. Next, I also had to adjust the sleeves a bit and pin them finally on. Don't mind me sewing over my pins. I know it's not the proper way, but I like to do it anyway. Well, and now only some details were missing. Finally, I added some buttonholes, placed a rubber to the edges of the sleeves and added a ruffled collar as you can see. Done with the blouse. And these were my fleece bracers. The fabric was too thick for any buttonholes, so I had to use Velcro instead. Now to the pants. The pattern was this one from Burda. I chose a slightly stretchy fabric and just traced all shapes onto it. These sewing weights were super handy by the way. I clipped the front to the back and serged over the edges. Following this, I cut out stripes of white fabric and folded the edges to the inside. I wasn't able to find a bright brown fabric with white straps, so I just sewed one as you can see. The step took a little bit of time though. I also finished the edges here and began sewing the pants together. You basically just do both legs first and then connect the left and the right side with each other. I only followed the sewing instruction here. Well, and this was the base. Next, I pinned in a zipper and finished this part as well. And this was supposed to be the waistband. Once you sewed it on and turned it over, it looked much more like one. I finally made a pattern for the white finish on the legs. You already saw this technique on the cloak, right? After turning the fabric around, I had to place some pins and iron it nice and flat. Next, I added more pins and sewed this part to the pants. I also made these crosses from a leather band and attached them with thread and needle. I really like the result. For the belt loops, I sewed 2 layers of fabric together and turned them inside out. Quite simple, right? Now I only had to hand stitch it to the pants and do the same with the fake pocket flappies. Finally, I pulled a thick wool thread through the pants. And another part was done, yay! Time to pack little Minna. Next, the belts. One of them was made out of faux leather. To sew it properly, I used a top feet foot. The attachment was just simple Velcro. For the red belt, I made a pattern on my dress form. It's quite weirdly placed on the hips, so I wanted to make sure it looked like in the reference. The result is pretty curved, as you can see. To strengthen the fabric, I added interfacing, which I had to iron on. I sewed 2 layers together and turned both inside out. Afterwards, I placed a further seam to flat out the edges. Meanwhile, Benny used a 3D program to create the belt buckle. Foam would work as well, but the 3D print was just more durable. In addition, it was just nice of Benny that he did the step for me. Once primed and painted, he used fabric glue to attach all pieces. To close it, he also sewed on a press stud. Time for the cute Froggy Bag. First, I drew a simple freehand pattern. again, I had no idea what I was doing here. I cut all pieces out and separated them. My fabric of choice was the super fluffy plushy material. When cutting, I added a good amount of sew allowance. Now let's put everything together. This was supposed to be the belly. My serger made the seams really nice and clean. Following this, I added the yellow edge. I also already attached the zipper, as you can see. However, I totally forgot to sew on a fluffy batting at the beginning, so I did it now. Afterwards, I clipped the front to the back. The arms and legs were just stripes of more felt. Once stuffed in, I sewed all around the edges. The zipper opening was still large enough to turn the bag inside out. So far for the base. Next, I tied knots into the arms and legs and shortened them a bit. To prevent any fraying, I sealed the ends with fabric glue. Now I sewed on some buttons for the face and prepared a lining for the inside. To give my froggy some puff, I stuffed it with quite some wadding. Same goes with the lining. Following this, I only had to hand stitch the edges to the inside of the zipper. And finally, my froggy bag was done. Having a pocket in a costume is super handy. Well, and here comes the hat. Again, I made a rough pattern on paper. Afterwards, I traced it on some felt, cut it out and had to cuddle Zelda. Once sewn together, I turned it inside out. Next, I placed the seam along the edge and the base was done. I pretty much did the same with the little hat thing. The first one turned a little bit too large though, so I had to make a second smaller one. For the attachment, I hand stitched the green cap to a headband. The little hat thing was also just sewn on. Following this, Benny had to attach the yellow emblem and made a pattern for the feather. The feather was a base out of thin felt that was glued together with contact cement. An aluminum wire in the middle would give it some shape later. He cut it out and added some details to fake the feather look. Afterwards, he airbrushed a pretty gradient on. The feather as well as the emblem were then sewn on with a few stitches. Next to the wig. The base was a brown high quality wig with a pony. I got rid of most of the hair and thinned the rest out quite a lot. I barely have any experience in wig styling, so forgive me if I mess up something here. The pony also got a little bit styled and secured with hairspray. Next, I grabbed this old bun from my Aiden Versio costume. The color isn't quite the same, but it did the job. Finally, the rest of the hair was braided and attached to the bun. And the wig and hat were done as well. The shoes! I got these lovely boots from Amazon. They only got some 3D printed rivets and some sewn fabric belts I had to wrap around. Well, and so this whole costume was finally done. It took me a lot longer than expected, but I really enjoyed to sew a bit after my huge armor projects this year. Also, the Guildmarm is one of my favorite characters in Monster Hunter. Now this wasn't so bad, right? I still don't like sewing, but as the Germans say, sometimes in life you have to bite into the sour apple. I hope you found this video inspiring and it will help you to figure out your own sewing project. You can do it! There are many more Monster Hunter costumes on my to-do list, and with the new expansion on the horizon, I'm super excited. You should totally give it a try as well. There are so many monsters to kill. I'm in research, and the more hunters, the better. As always, write me a comment, like and subscribe this video if you liked it. And if you want to support us on Patreon, check out the link!